Now, the Three Martini Lunch with Greg Corombos and Jim Geraghty.
And welcome, everyone, to the President's Day edition of the Three Martini Lunch. Along with Jim Geraghty of National Review, I'm Greg Corombos of Radio America. We have good, bad, and crazy martinis for conservatives today. Jim, we start with the good, and it was just last week that we talked about Donald Trump's first major press conference of the presidency. A little bit different than the way they've gone in the past, but one of the big lines, of course, that came away from it was Trump clashing with the media and saying, look, the American people deserve an honest media, and the American people just don't trust you anymore. Hard to put it any more succinctly than that. Hugh Hewitt, the national radio talk show host, ran with the issue on an interview, I believe, Friday with John Dickerson of CBS News. He's also the host of Face the Nation. Dickerson making the point, which I think deserves to be made, that Trump demands honesty from the press, but Trump's relationship with the facts, like saying he had the biggest margin of victory since Ronald Reagan. Even among Republicans, that's not true. And some other things along the way, of course, that have not been borne out. But Hugh Hewitt brought him back to the issue that Trump brought up, and that's about the trustworthiness of the media. And I think to the surprise of some people, Jim, John Dickerson did not shy away from the fact that the media has done itself a great bit of harm lately.
Yes, it's true, and it's not because of anything obviously Donald Trump did. The press did all that good work ruining its reputation on its own, and we can have a long conversation about what created that. Part of it, though, is what you mentioned about the local weather report, which is to say a lot of hysterical coverage about every little last thing that doesn't warrant it. Having said that, it doesn't mean, and in fact it most explicitly does not mean that the press just throws out the standards.
Agree.
And one of the roles of the press is to make sure that the president, in the voice of the people, is telling the truth.
Jim, I feel like I shouldn't have to say this every day when it comes to these back and forths between the press and the media and other issues. We can have both. We can demand that the president be honest, and we can demand that the media actually get some stuff right. But John Dickerson's probably the biggest name to actually admit, although not really getting into many specifics, that the media has actually dug its own grave here.
The easiest thing to do when you have flaws is to deflect and point to the other side's flaws and say, well, don't spend any more time talking about the times I've gotten the facts wrong and been inaccurate. Look at those guys and look at how bad they are. And this applies both to the Trump administration and to the media covering it. Now, Greg, as long as I've been in conservatism, the arguments against the quote-unquote mainstream media have been a big part of us. And I think we've reached a very interesting split in how conservatives see the media. I always thought the point of this argument, our criticism, our complaints about when it was unfair, when it was biased, when it was inaccurate, when it gave a skewed or inaccurate view of the world, we wanted to do a better job. We wanted, when we picked up the newspaper in the morning, we wanted to know what was going on in the world. And some days that news would be good for us. Some days that news would be bad for us. We do our good, bad, and crazy martinis each day. We don't expect it to only tell me good things or happy things. I'm perfectly fine with telling me when Republicans screw up or when conservatives screw up. But I do expect it to be accurate, and I would like a relatively even-handed approach to that, which means that every time we've all seen the stories in which the party identification of a Democratic lawmaker that gets caught with his hand in the cookie jar or other places doesn't show up until the 13th paragraph, whereas when a Republican candidate or politician is caught in a scandal, it's mentioned right up there, and inevitably there's some sort of column or think piece next to it saying, do Republicans have a problem because of politician X? Someone else had put out the very astute observation that anytime you see the headline, Republican lawmaker says X, and X is something terribly controversial or racist or offensive or something like that, the reason it's you saying Republican lawmaker is because you've never heard of this person.
Right.
Marco Rubio says something controversial. The headline will say Rubio says something controversial. Trump, anybody else. But if it's a unknown state legislator up in New Hampshire, and they have like hundreds and hundreds of state lawmakers just up in New Hampshire alone, right? There are 1,000 state legislators across the country. One of them is going to turn out to be a nut. One of them is going to turn out to believe in UFOs. One of them is going to turn out to have some sort of really wacky, crazy idea out there or say something terrible and offensive. But always, a good portion of the media coverage spotlights this person, i.e. Todd Akin, and uses that to paint the picture of the Republican Party as a whole. And we see through this. We get frustrated by this. So I'm glad to see Dickerson kind of acknowledging this and addressing this. And my attitude would be, I want the media to get better. Now, I think there are a bunch of other Republicans and conservatives who just want to see the media get bashed. They just want to see the media destroyed. They just want to, beat it down with sticks, and they don't really care what replaces it. Now, if you believe in the need for a fully informed public, it needs a better system than the mainstream media to replace that. And I think we've seen a lot of times where my sneaking suspicion is there are plenty of folks on the right who'd be very comfortable with a right version of the mistakes that the left of center mainstream media makes. And I don't think that's really the improvement. Our goal should be to do the job better than they do so that everybody trusts us. But anyway, that's my faraway dream for someday, Greg.
Well, speaking of the enemy of my enemy is my friend, let's get back to our bad martini now. CPAC rolls out this week. Jim, you'll be there a little bit later in the week. The Conservative Political Action Conference, one of the biggest conservative events of the year, if not the biggest, outside of presidential years where there's conventions and so forth. The keynote speaker this year is Milo Yiannopoulos. He would be the provocateur from Breitbart. He, of course, made headlines not that long ago when his event was canceled at UC Berkeley and there were riots in the streets, and that's when Robert Reich said, oh, those must be conservatives. I'm sure there's a good chance those are conservatives, just trying to make Milo's name for him. Milo is obviously getting defended by many of us on the right for his right to free speech, even though he likes to take on the PC culture, and that's not welcome on liberal campuses. At the same time, though, a lot of what Milo says is truly and deeply offensive. He said many things that could be described as anti-Semitic. He's been quoted as suggesting that student-teacher sexual relationships, the student's really the predator. He suggested that adult-child relationships sexually might not be all that bad. I mean, this is a guy who has obviously said things that should make most conservatives recoil in a number of ways. Doesn't mean you have to condemn everything he says, because some things are truly repulsive. But, Jim, I'm not sure we should be celebrating this guy just because liberals hate him.
I think Milo is a guy who has really benefited from the contrast to irate, out-of-control, rioting Berkeley protesters. Given a choice between that, we on the right are going to gravitate towards Milo and say, wait a second, he has a right to be heard. He has a right to speak his mind. He's been invited by the college Republicans at that school. And every other place he gets protested, he gets shouted down. He needs security, all sorts of things like that. Yes, there is a genuine First Amendment case that is worth defending when it comes to Milo. What I'm curious about, the good news is, Greg, I don't know if you've had a chance to get to at least the National Harbor location of CPAC. They're pretty good about keeping the wackos out. They do a pretty good job of keeping protesters, and I don't expect there to be any massive disruption during Milo's speech. So I think the bigger question for the attendees of CPAC, which are by and large young conservative activists, folks who care passionately about these things, people who may or may not want to make a career out of this, people who really feel an extraordinarily strong desire to make a real change in the world. What can Milo teach those people? And I really want to hear what he has to say, because right now, from what I've seen from Milo, is that Milo really knows how to promote Milo. I don't know how much Milo succeeds in promoting a conservative ideas or policies or the conservative philosophy and the movement. I know that, what Milo does a very good job of is exposing that leftists are intolerant. I don't know about you, Greg. I kind of got that. I feel like people are familiar with that now. I think after the first riot, they kind of figured this down. So yes, we should defend him against the politically correct speech codes and against crazy rioters. But I'm really not sure what he brings to the table to the average young conservative activist who wants to make a change in the world. And I really would like somebody to put that question to him, because my guess is if the Milo advice is to be more like me, well, Milo, that works for you. I don't think the rest of us want to be you. And even if they did, it's not going to work because he is unique. He is one of his. The last thing the world needs is 1,000 Milo knockoffs trying to do his shtick. And that's what my suspicion is, that it is a shtick, that it's not actually a replicatable method of communication and success that will actually move the ball in the right direction for us. But for some of my colleagues, they're saying Milo shouldn't be invited. They have no interest in listening to him. I'm willing to listen to him. I'm skeptical, but I'm willing to hear what he has to say. But my suspicion is that Milo is really, really good at promoting himself and nowhere near as good when it comes to promoting an idea larger than himself.
Jim, as I mentioned at the top of the show, today is President's Day. People like you and me who are old enough know this is really Washington's birthday and maybe Washington and Lincoln's birthday, and then they decided that everybody needs a participation trophy, so it's President's Day. Everybody gets honored. It should be in February because let's just point out the fact there were 4 presidents born in February, and all of them were great: Washington, Lincoln, Reagan, and William Henry Harrison. People would say, well, why William Henry Harrison? Because he only lived for a month while in office. Jim, I can't think of anyone who did less damage to the Constitution
There you go.
than William Henry Harrison. So I don't think the power of the executive was greatly abused at that point, and all sorts of other ways that William Henry Harrison did nothing to further the growth of government. So I think he deserves to be much higher on the list. And speaking of lists, USA Today is reporting that C-SPAN has put out a new list in consultation with advisors from Rice University and Howard University, ranking all the presidents, but you have to be out of office. So Trump is not on the list. Lincoln comes in first, followed by George Washington, then Franklin Roosevelt. Theodore Roosevelt, Dwight Eisenhower finish out the top 5. Reagan is 9th. Lyndon Baines Johnson is 10th. Woodrow Wilson 11th. Go get that. Barack Obama is in his first of these surveys because he's now out of office. He finishes 12th. And once again, rounding out the very, very bottom, James Buchanan, no surprise. Franklin Pierce and Andrew Johnson also way down at the bottom. So, Jim, obviously some conservatives will like who's towards the top of the list. Some liberals might like it too. What do you make of the names we're seeing so far?
Look, it's not surprising that I and a good portion of history professors might see things a little bit different. But let me just double check. Greg, did you just say LBJ was 10th?
10th.
10th? Hey, LBJ, how many kids did you kill today?
That's right. Yep.
The guy who chose to not run for re-election because he would have lost his own party's primary?
Right.
Guy who tore apart the country. And if we're going to credit him for the Great Society, we can't look at any of the failures of the Great Society, any of the ways it did not live up to the hype, the way we fought the war on poverty for decades and poverty won. Really? None of that gets in there? Okay. All right. Now I see what curve we're going on. And who came in dead last? Was that Greg?
James Buchanan.
Oh, come on. Charles Logan was way worse than James Buchanan.
Yeah, Charles Logan finished 41st. I think he definitely deserves to be last.
He's got to be kidding. Okay, now I was going down the list, and a bunch of these, I'm just the Centox nerve gas conspiracy alone should get Logan to the bottom. But I had gone on the list. People blame Robert Fowler for the attack on Baltimore. I think because of the health issues he suffered, he ended up not getting nearly as much blame. Where did they have Jack Stanton? The former governor of Arkansas?
Jack Stanton, 26th.
You got to be kidding me. Okay, I know they never proved it, but the rumor was he had slept with a friend's underage daughter and all that kind of stuff. I know everyone loves his wife and all that stuff. Let me guess. President Bartlett was like, what, 12, 13?
He was actually 7th, yeah.
You got to be. Okay, well, not surprising. Undoubtedly, the media loved him the entire time. They said his speechwriters were great. The only thing that President Bartlett had going for him was that all of the Republicans during those years acted as if some liberal was writing the lines for them. I mean, they just lived up to every liberal stereotype those years. And no matter what we did, we could not get them to stop. So 2 others, I'm guessing, they usually traditionally end up in the 30s and 40s, and I really think they should be higher. President James Marshall during the Air Force One crisis back in 1997.
Yeah, 31, Michigan guy. He should be way higher.
Really? Are you kidding?
Yeah.
All right, so that's bad. Here's the other thing. I always felt President Mitchell, the way he handled the 1996 Independence Day crisis. Everyone loves the way he responded. Nobody blames him for the lack of preparedness for that infamous July 4th.
Completely.
Where was he ranking?
Absolutely. Oh, he is better than he should be. He's at 23rd on this list. But not only that, he nuked his own city and it did no good.
Yes. You'd think at the I'm guessing they didn't ask a lot of Houston historians for their views on that. So anyway, let's tell everyone to go refer to C-SPAN and they can find all of these totally real presidents and rank them themselves.
Yes. David Palmer should be higher, too. He was at 17th. And forget the syntax. Authorizing the murder of a former president should get Logan the bottom slot, too. I mean, that was
there you go. Exactly.
Not a good stretch. Hopefully most of you have at least a clue of what we're talking about here in the last half of this third martini. Jim, happy President's Day to you and all of yours, and we'll talk to you tomorrow.
See you tomorrow, Greg.
Jim Geraghty of National Review. I'm Greg Corombos of Radio America. Thanks for being with us today, and be sure to tune in again on Tuesday for the next 3 Martini Lunch.